Everything is happening through these screens.
How are we getting the most out of that person?
I want to see this thing grow long term.
Amazing story. You have such a unique perspective on that.
Schedule a 2-week vacation.
I applaud those models.
Undervalue.
Secure your digital footprint as well.
Why were they even put in place in the first place?
Only the most adaptable survive. Let's get to the leaders list. Operational efficiency. That is a sexy subject. Well, it is, if you recognize that it is the quiet engine behind profitability, scalability, and resilience. It's the difference between a good company and a great company. And that's why mastering operational efficiency is the subject that we're going to cover on today's leaders list. And today I'm going to talk with Brenda Busch. She's a veteran operator who has seen ops from many, many different angles. She's got an amazing story and some great specific information you can start to use today to become more efficient. I'm Bryon Morrison. Let's get to the leaders list. Brenda Busch, welcome to the leaders list. We're thrilled to have you.
Thanks, Bryon. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So listen, the subject in this episode is going to be about operational efficiency, and we're going to get into that more. But I think you have such a unique perspective on that because of the different roles you've had in your career. You mind just telling everybody a little bit about your background and what you've done that's kind of brought you to this point?
Sure, absolutely. So I started off in the agency environment. So spent about a decade or so in B2C and B2B agencies working on branding, advertising, and internal communications. Big clients. Pepsi, Omni Hotels, TXU Energy, and also doing internal comms for Alliance Data. So really got to see how the agency world worked, both at a larger agency and a smaller agency, and see how efficiency worked and how they managed a variety of different clients with a lot of different projects. Some of them were retainer, some were project-based. So really got to see how that worked in that environment. And then when I left there, I co-founded a local craft brewery here in Dallas. And, efficiency, operational efficiency, totally different environment. That was manufacturing, but also some on-site. So really still, in the CPG category, but totally different world for operational efficiency when you're in more manufacturing type environment. And now at Proxxy, I get to work with a variety of different clients, and they're more service-based businesses, and they have their own unique challenges around, operational efficiency.
Yeah, that's so unique to see it from a creative environment like an agency, a manufacturing environment, and then to be able to see it across multiple SMBs. So now you know why we invited you to the leaders list. But I'm curious, when I say to you operational efficiency, like what's the first kind of the things that go through your mind?
I mean, it's about the systems working right and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so, what are the goals? What is the company trying to achieve? And are the systems that are in place moving you towards those goals? Or why were they even put in place in the first place? And sometimes I see systems that it's like nobody seems to know why that's there, or if it's still needed, and maybe it should just be scrapped. Maybe it needs to be changed. But efficiency should really mean that the tools and the things that you're doing are moving you closer towards your vision. And I love the quote, don't spend major time on minor things. And so it's also, when you're running efficiently, you should be able to do things quickly, but also effectively, and it's so don't just do bad things quickly over and over again. You want to make sure that you're moving in the right direction. So that's really what operational efficiency means to me.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like you're just naturally geared toward this also. Was this something that, like that role of COO, chief of staff, account management, were you always just kind of drawn to operational efficiencies?
Yes, and I jokingly say, I'm German, so part of it's in my blood. I can't help that. But I did something called UMAP and Clifton Strengths Finder, which was really interesting. It's a different assessment that I had done, and my top two strengths are achiever and responsibility. So I like to get things done, and I have a high degree of responsibility in getting them done. And my number 3 is strategic. So the way those 3 work together makes me really well suited to that role. And I think I've always been wired to go, how can this run better? And it's whether I'm out at a restaurant or I'm at work looking at what's going well and how can we make this just a little bit better. That's just a natural lens through which I look at everything. And so to me, it's just kind of a fun challenge on how can we make this better. So when I hear a complaint from someone on a team about this isn't working well, or a frustration about something, to me, that's always a really interesting thing for me to pay attention to. Is this is not just a complaint or someone whining about something. This is an idea. This is an opportunity to do something better. So what's not working about this that can make everything work better?
Yeah. You know what I appreciate about you is you look for the root cause. So when we start talking about operational efficiencies, I know in Proxxy we look at like how do we eliminate an issue or automate, a process, but you have to understand like what's the root cause that's creating that error, that frustration, that satisfaction issue. So yeah, that's perfect. So when you go into an organization, what are some of the first things that you look for, as you're just trying to get a lay of the land and find those opportunities? And how do you get to the root cause versus the immediate inconveniences?
Yeah, I mean, first I want to start with their vision. Where are they trying to go? And I have seen where that's not always clear, and that creates chaos. And you can't be efficient if you don't know where you're going. If you have 8 people in the boat that are all rowing in a different direction and nobody knows where they're trying to go, then by definition you cannot be efficient and you cannot be effective in that situation. So I really like to start with, what is the vision? Where are you trying to go? And is that clear to everyone? Do you have that broken down into your annual goals and your OKRs, your quarterly goals? Do you have the KPIs set up so that everyone knows how their role is contributing to both those shorter term goals and the longer term goals? And to me, that's really the place that you need to start, because you can't just look at a system and say, is this efficient or not in a vacuum? You've got to look at on how that contributes to the bigger picture.
It's funny because you started off with systems and you were talking about that, and understanding the vision really comes back to the individual and the leadership also. Do you find that a lot of times with operational efficiencies, you talked about the fact that sometimes they just thing for no real reason. Do you find that a lot of the times it is the executive who unintentionally becomes a bottleneck in that process?
Well, I think it's so 2 different things. One, sometimes the vision is not always really clear, and I have seen it where the executive may not have really decided where they want to go, where they haven't decided, do I want to build a lifestyle company? Or am I building for acquisition? And if they haven't even made that kind of a fundamental decision, then you just can't move forward to some of the other goals, because you don't know if you're growing for scale or not, for example. But as far as the executive being a bottleneck with the day-to-day, that can easily happen because the founder's been there since day one. Nobody knows more than them. They know they've got all the answers, or that's how they're positioned. Everyone's used to seeing that way. So they've usually grown up the team. They've hired the team. And if there's been tenure, these people have been around for a long time. So it can very easily happen where people get in the habit of, let me check with the founder. Let me check with the founder. Let me check with the founder. And pretty soon the founder's ability to be the visionary and do what only they can do as the founder gets eroded by all the little interruptions of the day and everyone asking them all the questions. And so that can be the passive way that can happen. And then there are other times where the founder maybe has a hard time letting go, where maybe the team is trying to run with their decisions, but they're second guessing the team, or they just know that maybe they can do it best, but they're trying to weigh in on every decision and they have a hard time letting go of that. So it can really happen either way, where the team is checking in with the founder, or the founder is maybe staying too much in all the details. And so it can really happen either way. And I think what the founder needs to make a conscious decision to not do that, and then needs to have really clear decision-making authority given to his team, where like, here's where you can run with it. I want you to be able to take the ball and run with it. If you're going to make a mistake, you're going to make a mistake. We're going to make sure we learn from those mistakes. That's going to be our tuition for that mistake, whatever that cost us. But, which is not to say don't ask me any questions, as the founder, but the founder needs to make sure they're empowering their team to make those decisions, letting them become the experts in their roles, and as coming to the founder on more strategic, questions, to making sure there's alignment and things like that. And there should still be, check-ins and accountability and things like that. But you really have to build a team that is empowered to make those decisions, or you just can't grow.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And then you naturally walk that fine line between delegation and abdication, where you start to separate yourself and pull yourself back. And then, how do you keep that leader engaged enough that they're managing at the right level? I love your point about, the tuition cost. It's because the other thing that I've seen, I don't know if you see this as well, but the unintentional part is when the founder or the leader puts their cape on and they swoop in and solve problems, but then they start to get to a point where they unintentionally they abdicate and they let people start to fail, but it gives them this, huge adrenaline rush to be able to come in and solve the problem. And so then they end up getting trapped in that. So yeah, I've seen all of those things are the traps of leadership that, it's difficult if you haven't done it before to even be able to see yourself doing it.
Yeah, sure.
Yep. So you had mentioned OKRs, EOS, you mentioned a few of those things. What are some of the frameworks that you've seen, really helpful that should be on every leader's list?
I do really like EOS systems and software that helps that. I've used 90IO. I liked that a lot, so that it keeeps everything really visible for the leadership team and keeps everyone focused on those, the quarterly rocks. Asana boards are hugely helpful for keeping things organized. Tools like that, any KPI trackers that you have for the team to make sure that, having that data is how you make sure that you don't get in that abdication type of situation. The leadership keeps connected, the founder keeps connected with his leaders by making sure that there are regular check-ins against those OKRs, that there's visibility into the KPIs. And those are really your dashboard, just like you wouldn't drive your car if none of your dashboard was illuminated and working, So these are your snapshots. This is how are we going in the right direction? Are the things that we're working on working? Or do we need to pause and tweak something? Because that's data. That's how we are able to make those decisions and make sure that we're going in the right direction.
Yeah. I always tell everybody, the key tools for me to find efficiencies are implementing a business operating system, something that it creates a language and consistency in the organization that gives a flywheel effect. The other thing is what you were talking about, some sort of a PM project management platform or rigor around like, how do we manage initiatives? For those of you that are out there that are EOS fans, one of the challenges with EOS is just the rock management process. And so doing a classic work breakdown structure on big rocks and big initiatives. And instead of just saying to somebody every quarter, like, so 50% done, how far are you? You can actually go through and you can see work product along the way. That's one of the things that we've also found. And then just having some sort of a data flow. Yeah, those every one of those points that you brought up, those are like standards that set up for great efficiencies to be found.
Yeah.
And what about taking someone through journey mapping? Because that's kind of something that you can take from the advertising days, because you spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about what's the natural journey for a consumer. But businesses internally need to kind of think about that same journey map as well, right?
Yeah, sure. And we develop the RACI framework on that to again make it really clear who is responsible for something, who just needs to be consulted. That helps with that decision making framework to go through that really formally, and then looking at the SOPs that are in place, and do we have enough SOPs? Are they being, and then also are they being used? I like to look at that piece of it as well, because I have seen too often where there are great SOPs written and it's a really nice binder that's on somebody's shelf, and they're used as a reference tool to train somebody. And I'm a big believer in taking the SOPs and figuring out how do we incorporate these into the day-to-day work so that it forces the team to actually use them. And the analogy I always give to teams is, that surgeons who know what they're doing still have a checklist every time they go into surgery. Somebody's checking the name and the date of birth on the wristband, and somebody's going to write in Sharpie what leg they're operating on. And it saves lives. The 10 checklist thing saves lives. So whether you're at an agency, you're in a manufacturing environment, or you're in a service-based business, you have to figure out a way that how do we get these SOPs incorporated into our actual daily workflow, and we don't, and so that people aren't able to skip steps, because the whole SOP process should be very thoughtful. It should be best practices, and it's really easy for anybody to go, I've got this, I don't need to check it. And pretty soon the 10 things that you were doing turn into 9 and turn into 8 because you've forgotten one, or you think I've done that before, and that's a natural human instinct to do that. So it's really great to find a way to incorporate it into the day-to-day process. And I also like to say I try to build systems that don't rely on people's memories, because we're all fallible. We can all forget a step. So how can we build a process that if you're having that again takes that memory piece out?
So the systems essentially drive the process. Instead of making everybody memorize every piece of the process, systems drive that process, but you still understand and map it so that way they have it in context, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so now, having seen it from multiple places and knowing that, a lot of our listeners are founder-led businesses, typically range from, up to 500 employees. So they go through a lot of different growth stages and experience lots of things. Where's a good place for an individual to start when they want to start thinking about operational efficiencies and how they start getting their mind right about that? Any specific recommendations you'd put on the leaders list?
Yeah, I mean, I would have them pause and sit down and be thoughtful about what are and start with 3. What are the top 3 things where you're having the biggest pain points around efficiency, or the things that are giving you the most stress, the most anxiety, the most frustration, just the things that you feel like aren't working, and write those things down. And then depending on the size of your team, obviously if you've got a team of 10, it's different than if you have a team of 500, but have some of your team do the same thing and incorporate people from different departments and different roles. Also mention the 3 things for them that they see as the biggest hurdles to efficiency. What are their pain points? What are not working well? And have a team meeting on it and do some brainstorming. I think a cross-functional meeting like that is super helpful. And then try to identify, all right, after you've done some brainstorming, what are the biggest 3 priorities? What do we think can make the biggest impact on the organization, or what can contribute the most towards our goals or towards our vision? And then pick one to start with and get some ideas, again, cross-functionally. And then don't try and tackle them all at once. Keep that list and keep that brainstorming, keep the results of that, but decide on one. Okay, we all said this is the most important place to start. We're going to start there. We're going to implement these things. We're going to work on this, and then we're going to check back in and see, is it working? Are things better? And a lot of times with a new process, it's not just in and then done. It takes people a minute to adapt to the new process, to start using the new process, get comfortable with it. You hear the adage, it takes 3 weeks to make a habit. I've heard, people need to hear something 7 times before they think they've heard it for the first time, and that you have to be aware of that, because when you're trying to incorporate change, you have the early adopters, but you also have people who are like, I've heard this before. I'm going to wait. I'm not going to do anything until I see if this new thing is here to stay and if I really have to do it. So you've got a breadth of responses you're going to get from the team on how willing they are to adapt a new process too. So you've got to, roll it out after, but you're going to have better buy-in when you incorporate more people in that brainstorming process as well, which is really important. And then after it's been rolled out, you want to check back in. And again, cross-functionally, is this doing what we hoped it would do? If not, do we need to make any tweaks? And then do that and make sure that feels solid, feels like it's working and is part of the process before then you jump into number 2. Because if you try and change 6 big things all at once, then everyone's looking all around and no one knows what to focus on, and you don't move the needle that way.
Yeah. It's so funny. I love your point about, and what often gets forgotten is, like, everybody thinks about, okay, I got to do a research phase, I got to do a planning phase, I got to do a launch phase. It's the measure and optimization. What happens after it goes live, and how do I make sure that all the work that I put into it is actually working? And I think that's such a great insight to recognize that, instead of doing 50 things at once, doing one thing exceptionally well and making sure that it is routinized and built into the business, you're just going to have much better results. So I think that's a great piece of advice. Another one I'll throw out, we're talking about this, one of our clients, we just implemented this mindset of every initiative that comes across the desk, they eliminate it, they delegate it, or they automate it. And doing that, it was amazing how many hours one organization that had 250 employees in it went through that process, not just flippantly, but literally went through it with top executive, then went through it with the leadership team, and then had them do that with 3 of their top people in their team. And it resulted in easily multiple hundred, I think it was $480,000 worth of savings just in eliminating a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, which is like, hey, we just always did it this way.
Yeah.
And it'll let them kind of have that right to say, I'm gonna rethink elements of my daily process.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is such a great subject. We could go on and on about this, and I find that it's also very specific to an organization, right? So hard to say sweeping, hey, you should look for operational efficiencies. But I think you've given some really nice, specific tactical things that people can work on, with also understanding strategically how to view it. So, delegate, eliminate, automate. That's a simple place for you to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, looking into the future, AI is such a great tool. Obviously everyone's talking about AI, but AI is such a great tool to help you or help businesses figure out where they can delegate, eliminate, and automate. I mean, it's a fantastic tool for that, but I'm seeing that in almost every role throughout organizations. And some organizations are going to have roles where it doesn't necessarily apply, but it can really help people with thought starters on in really every subject, whether it's what are some good KPIs I should be setting for this role, or give me some ideas about ways to be more efficient in this department. I mean, you can ask such open-ended questions, you can put in such detailed prompts, and it can be really useful for that, but can also be really useful to be more efficient on things like timesheets, manual tasks that someone is painstakingly doing a routine task. And that goes back also to that pain point thing I mentioned before, is what are you saying is inefficient? What is your team saying is a pain point? And then how can AI help with those pain points, right? Because it's just a tool. It's just like anything else. We wouldn't expect someone to use Excel, or to stop using Excel and just go back to making a ledger on a legal pad. We have these tools, let's use them, and so it can be applied to so many different roles, and just figuring out how I can use these tools to simplify, to delegate, to eliminate, or to automate some of what's going on is really helpful.
Yeah, such great input. And I'll tell you, the future is bright when you start thinking about how much we will be able to get done. Everybody says it all the time, but I'll reiterate, you may not necessarily lose your job to AI, but you definitely will lose it to someone who's using AI.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a requirement today. So Brenda, this was awesome. Thanks for giving your perspective from so many different angles. And I think there's a whole bunch of great stuff that people can start immediately using tomorrow to gain some efficiencies in their business. So thanks for being on the leaders list.
All right. Thanks, Bryon. Appreciate it.